Hi, I'm Alexa, and I thought today we could talk about our rights, exercising them when it comes to protesting. So, unless you have been living under a rock, you have probably heard that there are protests in Los Angeles, and there has been some extreme escalation by the federal administration overriding and without the consent of the state governor, which questionably legal actions and will be litigated in court. Definitely a lot going on. So what are your rights as a protest? If you also have heard, there is a big military parade this weekend in DC. And I think the count was over 1,800 different known locations around the entire US, there are counter protests. They're calling it No Kings protest. 1,800 registered locations. That means that there could be other protests that just haven't registered on with that site. That's pretty flippin' insane. I mean, I don't remember what all of the women's marches were back in 2017, but I don't think it got that high. I will be putting 2 links in the description. So as always, you know me, I like to give sources. So the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, that one is the US and it talks about US specifically. I will also put a link to Amnesty International and Right to Protest, which they actually talk about international, various countries and such like that. Interestingly, the right to protest, most people think we all have the same rights, okay? And on paper, we do. In reality, the more, let's call them markers, but that's not really the right word. The more markers we have of a marginalized community, which can be your race, your sex, your ability or disability, your religion, where you're from, your immigration status, all of these, so many more, all of these different things, the more of them that intersect in a person, so the more of those things that you are a part of, the more of those various groups, the harder it can become to exercise your rights. So if you have a disability, it can be very difficult to exercise your rights simply because you are physically unable to do certain things. That's a physical barrier to exercising that right that you technically have the same right as everyone else. Think about, there are some really famous images of people who used wheelchairs. They literally crawled up the steps, I believe it was of the Capitol building in DC, to try and help bring awareness to, gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the law. It must have been the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, and to try and help get that passed. So that would have been in the 1990s that they did that. It was something to do with that. And there's one of a child, and she was, 10, 12, something like that, and couldn't walk, was climbing up those steps. That brought awareness to the fact that most public buildings way back when, they didn't have access ramps for people who were unable to climb stairs. They didn't necessarily have elevators in buildings and accessibility. That is one barrier that if you are not disabled, you do not have. So it's not saying, when you talk about privilege, and we've talked about in some other videos, privilege is not necessarily saying you have something special or extra. It's saying that you don't have a barrier that someone else does have. So if you can walk, you do not have the barrier of not being able to get up steps because you're in a wheelchair, right? It's quite simple. When you add in multiple factors, so for example, disabled, female, minority ethnicity, minority religion, there are much more threats to you of people who are against that minority group, whichever one of the four I just mentioned in this scenario are, the more risk you take when you speak out, because you are now speaking out about 4 issues instead of 1, which gives everyone around you, you are risking them being against you on one of each of those 4 issues. So it's 4 times the risk. It's probably different, and I'm not a mathematician, but you see how that can work, I hope. I have felt this at times. So as a female, I have spent, and as a football fan, I have spent a lot of time in places where I have been the only woman, or there may have been like 2 or 3 other women in a group of 50 to 100 men. Now, I've never put myself in a bar of like our arch rival team fans, right? I've never gone and done that intentionally. I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would want to take that additional risk. I am also an immigrant, and lately that has become a thing that is worrying, because the rhetoric that is being spewed right now by this administration and the people representing them and the people that they have put in power of the various agencies, it's no longer illegal immigrants. They are quite literally going to the immigration offices where people who have been in this country legally, the entire time, legally, showing up for their next appointment, as they are required to do, legally, following the law with no criminal records. They are going there and arresting those people. So it has nothing to do, and we were saying this the entire time for years, the people who saw this coming. We have been saying this whole illegal versus not legal, illegal, not legal, it was smoke and mirrors. It is a very, very, very short way from demonizing illegals to taking legal immigrants to also capturing and detaining citizens. And in the past couple of months, multiple U.S. citizens have been detained by Immigration and Custom Enforcement, or ICE, whatever it's called. We knew it was coming. They are literally following the same playbook that country after country after country, decades worth of historical data. It is a literal checklist of actions. They have told us that they are going to do this. When you look at the things that have been published by these various advisors to our current administration, our current executive branch, when you look at the things that have been published by the people who have put in charge of the various agencies, when you look at what has been published by the people behind those people, so like the Heritage Foundation, the Project 2025, when you look at all the things they have published, you can see the full picture of their agenda, and it is absolutely ridiculously egregious. But the good news is, and this is the part you have to remember, knowing what their playbook is means we already know what the counter playbook is. History has shown us what it is. They wish to incite fear. There is an antidote to fear. Okay, and it is very, very simple. It is joy and it is hope. And if you can find joy, and if you can find hope, if you can see the stories of the helpers, of the people who are joyous and kind and protective and helpful, if you can find those stories, which the mainstream media doesn't like because they don't get as many clicks and they don't get as much outrage and headline viewing of the news, if you can find those things, you can spark that hope and that joy and that perseverance within yourself. I don't remember, I think it was 2 videos ago, I did talk about hope in the darkest of times. You just have to remember to turn on the light. That is what you do. So me seeing my family reminded me of all the good things in the world. And obviously there's other good things, but being able to see them, being able to spend time with them, being able to enjoy that, that's why I fight for things that are the morally and ethically right thing to fight for. Because my family, my nibblings, they deserve a world that is more equitable, more kind, more just than the one they were born into, than the one we were born into. We have a responsibility to make this place a better for the future generations, to give them better than we had. We are living in a time that if we told our ancestors 2 or 3 generations back about what our lives are like here in the US now, their minds would be blown. We have so much to be so amazed and grateful for that they didn't have, right? And it is our responsibility to pay that forwards and to make life better for the future generations. So let's get back to actually protesting, because that was a big, long, circuitous way around. Our rights when we wish to go to a protest. If it is generally accepted normal public place, like a sidewalk, a park, stuff like that, we have the right to be there, to voice our opinions, our free speech. We cannot or should not be interfering with the purposes of, for example, a building. So I did see a video, and I don't know what I think about it. It is from New York City, and peaceful protesters locked arms, creating these chains, and I think it was several chains rows deep, and they blocked the garage exit of a federal building that I believe was an ICE building. Technically, that is interfering with the business of the building. And so from the ACLU, it's saying we as protesters don't actually have that right to do that. Did it look more like the good trouble that the 1960s civil rights movements, if you play by the rules when the rules are made to keep you down, right, you're never going to get ahead. Sometimes that good trouble of very peacefully doing something like those blocking arms and creating chains, that has been effective. One of the things I did want to mention, and before I let this video get too long, I saw a post on Facebook that had tips for if you're at a protest, and normally most protests are peaceful. They've done the studies. Most protests are peaceful. Even the 2020 George Floyd protests, it was something like 92% of them were peaceful. And yet, if you watch the news, you'd think that every single protest was like smashing up stores, looting, beating police. It wasn't. And when they said those ones that weren't peaceful, it could be as simple as someone throwing a stone at a building and smashing a window. That single action makes that protest not peaceful, even though the rest of it was, right? So don't get it twisted. The media will always show you the most shocking images to try and get a reaction out of you and your emotions and your amygdala. Peaceful protests, these rights that we have, we can assemble in public places. We can't block the sidewalks. We can't like stop people from getting through. When I think about things like Planned Parenthood protests, that's why they couldn't stop people from entering the building. That was a really big thing in the late 90s, at least in the news cycles that I was seeing. And it was very clear they cannot block the door. They cannot block people from going in. We have the right to video and take photographs of anything that is in sight from that public sidewalk, right? So the fronts of buildings, police offices, other enforcement offices, whatever it is, you have the right to video. If you're on private property, the property owner can set the rules. So private property, if you're out and you're walking, you want to make sure you're not walking on people's lawns, because then if they don't like the protests, that could then become trespassing. Right? So you want to be very careful that you are staying on sidewalks, you are staying on the public property. moving forwards. You don't need permits to march. However, if roads need to be closed or if it's going to interrupt traffic or whatever, like, check. If you're organizing something, you're going to want to check with your local authorities what the rules and the local ordinances are, and do what you need to. And then also know that the police's responsibility is to maintain peaceful right to assembly. That includes, if you are on one side of a protest, that also includes the counter protest. And it doesn't matter which side of the protest you're on. One is a protest, one is a counter protest, right? They need to keep them separate to minimize the risk of violence occurring, of tempers boiling over, of people losing their cool, and so on. Just make sure you know if there's going to be counter protest, that you know which side you need to be on. Make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. Make sure you know how you can retreat if you need to. I've seen posts about all of these things like, oh, mix this stuff together, and if you get sprayed with pepper spray. Authorities and medical people, they say just take water with you. And if you're out there in the middle of the day on like a 90, 100 degree day, you're going to need water to drink anyway. So definitely be very safe in terms of your own physical health. Things like chairs, you can take chairs to sit on, but again, you cannot block the sidewalk. Now, this is not just for protests. This is also peaceful assembly for things like parade routes. So I've been to multiple parades over the years, and I've seen people take their folding chairs and you sit there, and as long as people can walk past you on the sidewalk, and not just people walking, but for example, people in wheelchairs or push chairs, they need to be able to get past you too. So you can't block those sidewalks, but you can have a chair on public property. And find the joy. As I said earlier, the antidote to the fear and the hate that is being spewed is to find the joy, to find the hope, and to find the community. I've been watching videos of people line dancing in the sidewalks and the public spaces in Los Angeles protests. They're so joyful. It almost looks more like a little festival than a protest, right? Find the joy. I will say this as my very last thing. I saw a tip on if you are at a protest that's peaceful and all of a sudden someone comes along and is they're intentionally about to start trouble, right? If you are a peaceful protester, immediately upon someone starting stuff, sit down and basically make sure your hands are visible. You can be videoing, right? You can have your phone and be videoing, but make sure your hands are visible and sit. What this is going to do is it will immediately make it clear who the troublemaker is to any type of authority. And if those authorities have any sense, they will not try and hurt anyone who is sitting down, especially with all of the video cameras that will be on them, because this day and age, you can't go anywhere without being filmed. The reason that the 1960s civil rights movements worked was because it was peaceful protests on the side of the protesters. The violence was perpetrated against them, and the images of police hitting little old ladies who were sitting on the floor peacefully doing nothing with batons and like busting their heads open and stuff. The reason that caused such impetus and change and helped get the Civil Rights Act passed was because we as people do not like to see that violence. There is information out there, and I will find the link and drop this one as well. Non-violent protests, those peaceful protests, that good trouble that the civil rights activists of the 1960s showed us how to do. Those protests have longer lasting and more impactful changes that come about from them. Now, it is very difficult as people when we are angry. I get that. We all lose our heads sometimes. We all get mad. We have to learn to practice it. Practice sitting down. Practice not losing your head. Practice not responding. Even in your head, going through it alone in the shower, right? You're in the shower. Just make up a scenario and I'm not going to react. What could a person say to me that would really make me mad? Practice it. Peaceful protest has longer lasting impact on the change for good. And that is throughout documented, studied history of protesting. It's powerful. Our voices and our numbers are powerful when we believe in a common cause, when we stand against fear and hate mongering and cruelty. It does win out. I'm not telling you to go out on No King's Day this weekend. I'm not telling you to go anywhere or do anything. That is your choice. That is what you are comfortable with, what you believe, what you want to do. It's your choice. If you do choose to go out, take a look at the links and definitely look up, maybe just Google like tips for staying safe at protests or something. It never, ever hurts to be prepared. And regardless of whether you go out and protest, regardless of whether you post on social media so other people can see that they're not alone, regardless of whether you share stuff with your family or your friends or whatever it is that you're doing, regardless of all of that, joy and hope are the antidote to the fear. If you made it this far, thank you. I will see you on the next one. Be kind to yourself.